Commander Jake Morrison had seen death in 100 different forms across 23 years of special operations. He had watched friends fall in the mountains of Afghanistan, lost teammates in the jungles of South America, and held dying soldiers in his arms on beaches that would never make the evening news. But nothing had prepared him for the sound that echoed through the Hindu Kush Valley that cold October morning, a single rifle shot that seemed to tear the very fabric of the world apart. The sound came from 3,247 meters away. Jake knew this because his rangefinder told him so, but his mind refused to process what his eyes were seeing through the scope. A figure in local dress had just eliminated a high-value target that his entire SEAL team had been tracking for 3 weeks. One shot. One kill. From a distance that would challenge the best military snipers in the world. "Did you see that?" whispered Petty Officer First Class Tommy Chan, his spotter, whose voice carried a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Someone just took out Nazir from over 3 clicks." Jake adjusted his scope, trying to get a better look at the shooter. The figure was already moving, disappearing into the rocky terrain with a fluid grace that spoke of years of experience in these mountains. All he could make out was someone of medium height wearing traditional Afghan clothing and a headscarf that concealed most of their features. "Base, this is Trident 6, Jake spoke into his radio. "Target Nazir is down." "Repeat, target is down." "Copy that, Trident 6. "Confirm your team made the shot?" Jake hesitated. In his entire military career, he had never lied in a mission report. But something about this moment felt different, charged with an electricity he couldn't name. "Negative, base. We did not take the shot. Unknown shooter eliminated target from approximately 3,000 meters." The silence on the radio lasted nearly 30 seconds. When the voice returned, it carried the weight of confusion and concern. "Trident 6, please clarify. Are you saying there's another sniper in your area of operations?" "That's affirmative, base. And, whoever they are, they're better than anyone I've ever seen." Jake had grown up in rural Montana, learning to hunt before he could properly tie his shoes. His father, a Vietnam veteran, had taught him that the mountains held secrets and that respect for the land and its people was the first rule of survival. When he joined the Navy at 18, those lessons had served him well through BUD/S training and into the teams. He had always prided himself on being able to read terrain, weather, and people with an accuracy that bordered on supernatural. But this shooter had appeared and disappeared like a ghost. "Tommy, pack it up. We're moving to the shooting position." The climb took them 45 minutes of careful navigation through terrain that would have challenged experienced mountaineers. Jake's team of 6 SEALs moved in practiced silence, each man knowing his role and trusting the others implicitly. Staff Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, their demolitions expert, took point. Petty Officer 2nd Class Alex Thompson and Petty Officer 3rd Class David Kim covered their flanks. Hospital Corpsman 2nd Class Marcus Williams stayed in the middle of the formation, ready to provide medical support if needed. When they reached the position where the shot had originated, Jake found something that made his blood run cold. Carved into a flat stone, barely visible unless you knew exactly where to look, were initials, SM 2019. "Sir, look at this," called Kim, who was examining the ground nearby. He had found 3 brass casings, but they weren't from the rifle that had killed Nazir. These were older, weathered by years of mountain weather. "These casings are from different operations. Different dates." Jake picked up one of the casings and examined it carefully. The marking showed it was from a .338 Lapua Magnum round, military grade. But what caught his attention was a small scratch on the base of the casing, a mark he had seen only once before, years ago, in a classified briefing about missing American military personnel. Rodriguez, establish a perimeter. Williams, check for any medical supplies or personal items. Chen, help me search for more evidence. For the next hour, they combed through the area with the thoroughness that had kept them alive through dozens of operations. What they found painted a picture that Jake's mind struggled to accept. Hidden in a small cave, barely large enough for one person, they discovered a cache of supplies that told a story of long-term survival in some of the most hostile terrain on Earth. Military rations, some dating back 5 years. Water purification tablets. Medical supplies. A solar charging unit for electronic equipment. And, most disturbing of all, a small notebook wrapped in plastic, filled with handwriting in English. Jake opened the notebook with hands that trembled slightly, something that hadn't happened since his first combat mission as a young petty officer. The entries were dated, precise, and written in the careful script of someone with military training. Day 1847, 3 Taliban fighters spotted moving through the southern pass. No engagement. Mission parameters unchanged. Day 1963, medical supplies running low. Will need to resupply soon. Note, avoid the village of Bagram Kale. Local militia has increased patrols. Day 2201, long-range elimination of bomb makers successful. No collateral damage. Exfiltration clean. The entries went on, page after page, documenting what appeared to be a one-person war against Taliban and ISIS operatives in the region. But it was the final entry that made Jake's heart stop completely. Day 2387, SEAL team operating in sector. Commander appears competent but inexperienced in mountain warfare. Will provide overwatch as needed. These mountains have claimed too many good soldiers already. The date was yesterday. Sir, we've got movement, Rodriguez's voice crackled through the radio. Single individual approaching from the east. Approximately 800 meters and closing. Jake closed the notebook and slipped it into his tactical vest. Copy that. Everyone stay calm and keep your weapons lowered. We don't know who this is or what their intentions are. Through his binoculars, Jake watched as a figure approached their position with a confident, measured pace. The person wore traditional Afghan clothing but moved with a bearing that screamed military training. As they drew closer, Jake noticed details that confirmed his growing suspicion: boots that were clearly military issue beneath the traditional robes, a rifle carried with the casual competence of someone who had spent years using it as a tool of survival. When the figure was 50 meters away, they stopped and called out in accented English, "Commander Morrison, I believe you have something that belongs to me." Jake's team tensed, but he held up a hand to keep them calm. And what would that be? A notebook. And some questions that have been keeping you awake at night. Jake stepped forward, leaving his rifle with Chen but keeping his sidearm ready. Why don't you come a little closer so we can talk face to face? The figure approached slowly, hands visible and non-threatening. When they were 10 meters apart, the stranger reached up and pulled back the headscarf that had concealed their features. Jake felt the world shift beneath his feet. Standing before him was a woman, probably in her early 30s, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of winter sky. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and across her left cheek ran a scar that spoke of violence survived. But it was something else about her that made Jake's breath catch: a small tattoo visible on her neck, partially hidden by her collar. The same tattoo that decorated the arms of Navy SEALs who had served in the most classified operations of the past decade. Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez, United States Navy SEALs, she said, her voice carrying the weight of years spent in these mountains. Though I believe my official status is listed as missing in action, presumed killed. Jake's mind raced through briefings, casualty reports, and classified files. He remembered now a female SEAL who had disappeared during a classified operation in Afghanistan 5 years ago. Her body had never been recovered. The official report had concluded that she had been captured and killed by enemy forces. But here she stood, very much alive, having just demonstrated shooting skills that defied belief. "You're supposed to be dead," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. Sarah's smile was bitter and cold. "I was. For about 10 minutes. Then, I decided that dying wasn't going to stop me from completing my mission." "What mission?" "Your operation was terminated when you went missing. The entire team was extracted." "My operation was never about what the briefing said, Commander. I volunteered for something that officially doesn't exist. A program that places individual operators in deep cover for extended periods to conduct targeted elimination of high-value targets." Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain air. "That's not possible. There's no such program. There wasn't, officially." But, after September 11th, after all the political complications and rules of engagement that let too many bad people escape justice, some very smart people in very classified positions decided that sometimes you need someone who can operate completely outside the system. Sarah reached into her pack and pulled out a folder wrapped in waterproof material. She handed it to Jake with the same casual confidence she had displayed in everything else. 12 high-value targets eliminated over the past 5 years. Bomb makers, weapons dealers, and commanders responsible for the deaths of hundreds of American service members. All eliminated without political complications, without innocent casualties, and without any official acknowledgement of American involvement. Jake opened the folder and found himself looking at surveillance photos, target profiles, and mission reports that detailed operations he had never heard of. Each report was signed with the same precise handwriting he had seen in the notebook. "Why are you telling me this? Why reveal yourself now?" Sarah's expression grew serious, and, for the first time since she had appeared, Jake saw something vulnerable in her eyes. "Because my mission parameters have changed, Commander. And because I need your help." "Help with what?" "There's something happening in these mountains that's bigger than Taliban operations or ISIS recruitment. Something that threatens not just American forces in the region, but American civilians back home. And I can't stop it alone." Jake studied her face, looking for any sign of deception or instability. What he saw instead was the same determined focus he recognized in the mirror every morning, the look of a warrior who had seen too much but refused to quit. "What kind of something?" "The kind that involves weapons-grade plutonium being moved through these passes by people who have no intention of stopping at military targets." The words hit Jake like a physical blow. Nuclear materials in the hands of terrorists was every military planner's worst nightmare. "Do you have confirmation of this?" "I have 3 dead terrorists who were carrying Geiger counter readings that made my equipment scream warnings. I have photographs of a convoy that passed through here 2 nights ago carrying cargo that required radiation shielding. And I have intelligence that suggests the final destination is a major American city." Jake's radio crackled to life. "Trident 6, this is base. We need your team to return immediately. Priority Alpha orders coming down from JSOC." Jake looked at Sarah, who was watching him with an intensity that made him feel like she could see into his soul. "Commander, you have approximately 30 seconds to decide whether you trust me enough to delay your return to base. Because once you leave these mountains, you'll never see me again, and whatever is being planned will happen without any way to stop it." "Why should I trust you? For all I know, you've gone rogue. You've been presumed dead for 5 years. How do I know this isn't some elaborate terrorist recruitment scheme?" Sarah reached into her pack and pulled out something that made Jake's heart skip a beat. It was a small American flag, worn and faded, with names written on it in permanent marker. Jake recognized the tradition immediately, flags carried by soldiers to remember fallen teammates. But what made this flag special was that Jake could read the names written on it. Tommy Kowalski, killed in action in Helmand Province. Marcus Jefferson, died in a helicopter crash in Kandahar. Lisa Rodriguez, killed by an IED in Mosul. These were SEALs who had died in classified operations that Jake knew about because he had been there for some of them. "These are my teammates, Commander. My brothers and sisters who died fighting for this country. Do you really think I would dishonor their memory by betraying everything we fought for?" Jake's radio crackled again, more urgently this time. "Trident 6, respond immediately. You are ordered to return to base for emergency briefing." Jake looked at his team, all of whom were watching him with the trust that came from years of following his decisions in life and death situations. He thought about his duty to follow orders, his responsibility to his men, and his oath to protect American lives. Then, he thought about weapons-grade plutonium in the hands of terrorists. "Base, this is Trident 6. We have encountered unexpected complications in our area of operations. Request 12 hours to resolve situation before returning." "Negative, Trident 6. Return immediately. That is a direct order." Jake turned off his radio and looked at Sarah. "You've got 12 hours to convince me that you're telling the truth. But if this is some kind of trap or deception, I want you to know that my team and I have survived a lot worse than one rogue SEAL in the mountains of Afghanistan." Sarah's smile was the first genuine expression of warmth he had seen from her. "Fair enough, Commander. But before we start tracking plutonium smugglers, there's something else you need to know about me." "What's that?" "The shot I made this morning? That was from my secondary position. My primary shooting position was another 1,000 meters back. I could have made that shot from over 4 kilometers away if I had needed to." Jake stared at her, processing the implications of what she had just said. If she was telling the truth, she was operating at a level of marksmanship that exceeded anything he had seen in 2 decades of military service. "That's impossible." "A lot of things about me are impossible, Commander. That's why I'm still alive after 5 years in these mountains, and that's why I'm the only person who can stop what's coming. As if to emphasize her point, Sarah raised her rifle and, without using the scope, pointed toward a distant ridge. Taliban observation post, approximately 2,400 meters. 2 fighters with radio equipment. They've been watching us for the past 10 minutes. Jake raised his binoculars and scanned the ridge. It took him nearly a minute to spot what she was talking about, 2 barely visible figures positioned among the rocks, one of whom was indeed holding what appeared to be radio equipment. How did you? The question was interrupted by the sound of Sarah's rifle. Jake watched through his binoculars as the radio equipment exploded in the hands of one of the Taliban fighters, who immediately dove for cover. The second shot came half a second later, destroying a piece of equipment that Jake hadn't even noticed. Warning shots, Sarah said casually, lowering her rifle. They'll report that American ghosts are operating in this sector. Should keep other Taliban units away for at least 24 hours. Jake realized his mouth was hanging open and closed it with a conscious effort. How is this possible? No one shoots like that. You're right. No one does. But, I'm not no one, Commander. I'm someone who has spent 5 years learning everything these mountains can teach about survival, patience, and precision. I'm someone who has had nothing to do but practice and perfect skills that were already at the top 1% of military capability. She shouldered her pack and started walking toward the eastern edge of the valley. The plutonium convoy is headed for a staging area about 15 kilometers from here. If we move now, we can intercept it before it reaches the Pakistani border. But, once it crosses into Pakistan, tracking it becomes exponentially more difficult. Jake looked at his team, saw the questions in their eyes, and made a decision that he knew would change everything about his career and, possibly his life. Rodriguez, take point. We're following Staff Sergeant Martinez to intercept a nuclear smuggling operation. Maintain radio silence until further notice. As they began moving through terrain that seemed designed to kill unwary soldiers, Jake found himself wondering what else about his understanding of this war was completely wrong. But, one thing he knew for certain, Sarah Martinez was either the most dangerous ally he had ever worked with or the most dangerous enemy he had ever encountered. And, he was about to find out which. The 15-kilometer trek through the Hindu Kush Mountains tested every skill Jake Morrison had learned in 23 years of special operations. Sarah Martinez moved through the terrain like water flowing downhill, finding paths that seemed impossible, avoiding obstacles that Jake's team would have spent precious minutes navigating around, and maintaining a pace that challenged even the fitness levels of active duty SEALs. More unsettling than her physical capabilities was her intimate knowledge of every detail of their surroundings. She knew which rocks would hold their weight and which would shift underfoot. She identified wind patterns that would affect rifle accuracy from distances of several kilometers. Most remarkably, she seemed to sense the presence of other humans in the area before any electronic equipment could detect them. Taliban patrol, 3 men, moving southeast about 800 meters ahead, she whispered during their second hour of movement, gesturing toward what appeared to Jake to be empty mountainside. Jake raised his binoculars and scanned the area she had indicated. It took him several minutes to spot the figures she had identified, 3 men in traditional dress moving carefully along a goat path that was barely visible from their position. How did you know they were there? Birds. The ravens in this area are smart enough to avoid humans, but stupid enough to circle areas where humans have recently passed. Also, one of them is wearing aftershave. Aftershave? Cheap cologne, probably from Pakistan. You can smell it from downwind at about a kilometer in these dry conditions. Most Taliban fighters don't bother with personal hygiene items unless they're planning to meet someone important. Jake filed this information away along with dozens of other observations Sarah had made during their movement. She was operating at a level of environmental awareness that bordered on supernatural, and every minute he spent watching her work reinforced his growing conviction that her claims about surviving alone in these mountains for 5 years were completely true. Question, he said quietly as they paused behind a large boulder to rest and hydrate. If you've been conducting operations in this area for 5 years, why hasn't anyone else noticed? Taliban, ISIS, even local villagers, someone should have realized there was a shooter taking out high-value targets. Sarah's smile was grim. They have noticed, Commander. I'm known locally as Kala Marg, the Death Ant. Taliban fighters tell stories around their fires about a ghost woman who kills from impossible distances and disappears without leaving tracks. Most of them think I'm a supernatural punishment for their crimes. And you've encouraged these stories? Psychological warfare is often more effective than kinetic operations. If enemy combatants are afraid to operate in certain areas because they believe supernatural forces are hunting them, that's area denial without firing a shot. Petty Officer Chen wiped sweat from his forehead despite the cool mountain air. Ma'am, if you don't mind me asking, what happened to your original team? The mission report said you were killed in action along with the rest of your squad. Sarah's expression darkened, and, for a moment, Jake saw past the professional competence to something raw and painful. My team was betrayed. We were sent into a valley that intelligence said was clear of enemy forces. Instead, we walked into a carefully planned ambush with over 50 Taliban fighters positioned in elevated positions on 3 sides. She paused, checking her rifle's action with the unconscious precision of someone who had performed the movement thousands of times. 4 of my teammates died in the first 30 seconds. I was hit twice, once in the shoulder, once in the leg. The team medic, Hospital Corpsman First Class Jennifer Walsh, managed to get me into cover behind a rock outcropping. Jake noticed that her hands remained perfectly steady as she continued her equipment check, despite the obvious emotional difficulty of recounting the story. Walsh worked on my wounds while I provided suppressing fire, but we both knew the situation was hopeless. Too many enemy fighters, too little cover, and no way to call for extraction with our radio equipment destroyed in the initial ambush. How did you survive? Walsh made a choice. She gave me her medical supplies, her ammunition, and her sidearm. Then, she drew enemy fire away from my position by making a run toward what looked like better cover. She knew it was a suicide mission, but she bought me enough time to disappear into a cave system that the Taliban didn't know existed. Sarah's voice remained steady, but Jake noticed her jaw muscles tighten. I spent 3 days in those caves, bleeding, fighting infection, and listening to Taliban fighters celebrating their victory. When I finally emerged, I found the bodies of my teammates. Walsh had made it almost 50 meters before they cut her down. Why didn't you signal for extraction? Special Operations Command would have moved heaven and earth to get you out. Because I realized something during those 3 days underground, Commander. The ambush was too perfect. Someone with access to classified information had told the Taliban exactly when and where we would be. Someone had set up my team to die. Jake felt a chill that had nothing to do with the mountain wind. You're talking about a mole in the intelligence community. I'm talking about someone in our chain of command who sold American lives for money or ideology. And I realized that if I allowed myself to be extracted, whoever was responsible would know I was still alive and would find a way to silence me permanently. So you decided to stay dead and conduct your own investigation. I decided to honor the sacrifice my teammates made by ensuring their deaths weren't meaningless. Every high-value target I've eliminated over the past 5 years has been connected to the network that killed my friends. And I've been gathering evidence to identify the person who betrayed us. Sarah pulled out a waterproof folder and handed it to Jake. Inside were photographs, documents, and what appeared to be intercepted communications in multiple languages. This is 5 years of intelligence gathering, Commander. Names, dates, financial transactions, and communication intercepts that prove there's a network of American military and intelligence personnel who have been providing classified information to terrorist organizations in exchange for monetary payments and strategic advantages. Jake examined the documents, his expression growing more serious with each page. The evidence was meticulously documented and cross-referenced in a way that spoke of professional intelligence training. This is... He paused, struggling to process the implications of what he was seeing. This suggests corruption at levels that could compromise national security for decades. It suggests worse than that. The plutonium smuggling operation I told you about isn't being conducted by Taliban or ISIS fighters acting independently. It's being coordinated by the same network that killed my team, and they're using classified American intelligence to avoid detection and interdiction. Jake closed the folder and looked directly at Sarah. Why should I believe this? How do I know you haven't been compromised yourself? 5 years of isolation, constant stress, watching your teammates die that could drive anyone to paranoia or worse. Sarah nodded as if she had expected the question. You shouldn't believe it, Commander. You should verify it. But, right now, we have an opportunity to intercept a shipment of weapons-grade plutonium that will disappear forever if we don't act in the next 6 hours. She pointed toward a narrow valley that cut between 2 mountain peaks. The convoy is using that pass because intelligence provided to the smugglers told them it would be clear of American military presence. The same intelligence network that killed my team is ensuring that nuclear materials can be transported safely to their destination.
And where is that destination?
New York City. Specifically, a warehouse in Queens where the plutonium will be assembled into a radiological dispersal device, a dirty bomb designed to contaminate several square miles of one of the most densely populated areas in the world.
Jake felt his blood turn to ice water. How do you know this?
Because I've been intercepting their communications for 3 months. Because I've identified the bomb maker they're using, a former Pakistani nuclear engineer named Dr. Rashid Hassan, who supposedly died in a car accident in Islamabad 2 years ago.
And because I've seen satellite imagery of the warehouse where they're planning to assemble the device.
Sarah pulled out a satellite phone, military-grade equipment that Jake recognized as being far more sophisticated than anything a lone operator should have been able to acquire.
I can call a number right now that will connect you to Assistant Deputy Director Patricia Collins at the CIA.
She's been my only official contact for the past 18 months, and she can verify everything I've told you.
You've been in contact with the CIA? Unofficially. Director Collins stumbled onto evidence of the same network I've been tracking.
When she realized that official channels might be compromised, she reached out through back channels to see if the Death Ant might be interested in unofficial cooperation. Jake stared at the satellite phone, knowing that making the call would commit him and his team to a course of action that would end their military careers if Sarah was lying or delusional. But the alternative, allowing nuclear materials to reach American soil, was unthinkable.
Make the call. Sarah dialed a number from memory and handed Jake the phone.
After several seconds of routing through encrypted relays, a woman's voice answered.
Collins. Director Collins, this is Commander Jake Morrison, United States Navy SEALs.
I'm calling at the request of someone who claims to be Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez.
The pause on the other end of the line lasted nearly 10 seconds.
When Collins spoke again, her voice carried a weight that told Jake everything he needed to know.
Commander Morrison, what is your current location?
Approximately 45 kilometers northeast of Bagram, in the Hindu Kush Mountains.
Are you alone with Martinez?
Negative.
I have my full team with me. Commander, I'm going to give you a piece of information that is classified at the highest levels of government. Staff Sergeant Sarah Martinez has been operating under my direct authority for the past 18 months as part of a joint CIA Special Operations Command investigation into compromised intelligence networks.
Her official status remains missing in action, presumed killed for operational security purposes. Jake felt the world shift around him once again.
Director Collins, are you telling me that Martinez is officially working for the CIA? I'm telling you that Martinez has provided intelligence that has prevented 3 terrorist attacks on American soil over the past year.
I'm telling you that she has identified a network of compromised American officials whose actions have resulted in the deaths of dozens of American service members. And I'm telling you that if she says there's a nuclear smuggling operation in your area, you need to treat that information as gospel truth.
What are my orders, Director?
Your orders are to provide whatever support Martinez requires to intercept the nuclear materials she's tracking. As of this moment, you and your team are operating under my authority for this mission. Jake looked at Sarah, who was watching him with an expression that mixed hope and resignation.
Director Collins, can you confirm that Martinez has the authority to direct our operations? Commander Morrison, for the next 24 hours, Staff Sergeant Martinez has the authority to direct the operations of any American military or intelligence personnel in her area of operations. That authority comes directly from the National Security Council.
Jake closed his eyes and tried to process the magnitude of what he was being told.
Director Collins, I need you to understand that I'm being asked to accept some extraordinary claims based on a phone call to someone I've never met. I understand your position, Commander. But I need you to understand mine.
If the intelligence Martinez has provided is accurate, and her track record suggests it is, then we have less than 6 hours to prevent nuclear materials from reaching a staging area where they will become effectively unrecoverable.
What kind of support can we expect? None, Commander. This operation is completely off the books. If you're captured or killed, the United States government will deny any knowledge of your activities.
But if you succeed, you'll have prevented an attack that would make 9/11 look like a minor incident. Jake opened his eyes and looked at his team. Each man was watching him with the trust that came from years of following his leadership into situations where failure meant death. They deserved to know what they were being asked to risk their lives for.
Director Collins, I need to brief my team. Can you give me 5 minutes? You have 5 minutes, Commander. Martinez has my authority to brief your team on any classified information they need to complete the mission.
Jake handed the phone back to Sarah and gathered his team in a small circle behind the boulder that concealed them from observation. Gentlemen, what I'm about to tell you is classified at levels that could land all of us in federal prison if we discuss it with anyone outside this circle. We've stumbled into an operation that involves nuclear terrorism, compromised American intelligence networks, and orders that come from the highest levels of government. He paused, looking each man in the eye before continuing. I can't order you to participate in this mission. According to everything we've been taught about chain of command and official channels, what we're being asked to do violates every protocol we've sworn to follow. But, according to someone at the CIA, what we're being asked to do could prevent a nuclear attack on American soil. Petty Officer Rodriguez spoke first. Sir, with respect, we didn't join the teams to follow protocols. We joined to protect American lives. If Martinez is telling the truth about nuclear materials being smuggled, then we have a job to do. The other team members nodded agreement. Hospital Corpsman Williams added, Commander, I've watched Martinez move through this terrain for the past 4 hours. Either she's the most competent operator I've ever seen, or she's the most dangerous person we've ever encountered. Either way, I'd rather have her working with us than against us. Jake felt a surge of pride in his team that reminded him why he had chosen a career in special operations. These men were willing to risk everything based on trust and duty, not bureaucratic procedures or official recognition. All right, then. Martinez, brief us on the tactical situation. Sarah spread out a hand-drawn map that showed remarkable detail of the surrounding terrain. The convoy consists of 3 vehicles, 2 trucks carrying the nuclear materials and 1 escort vehicle with 4 armed guards. They're following this route through the mountain pass, which will bring them past our current position in approximately 2 hours. She traced the route with her finger, indicating specific geographic features with the precision of someone who had surveyed every meter of the ground personally. The nuclear materials are contained in lead-line cases that weigh approximately 150 pounds each. There are 4 cases total, which means we're dealing with enough plutonium to build multiple radiological dispersal devices or potentially 1 small nuclear weapon. Jake studied the map, noting the tactical advantages and disadvantages of various positions along the convoy's route. What kind of security are we facing? Professional, but not military trained. The guards are experienced smugglers who know the terrain, but they're not prepared for opposition from American Special Operations Forces. However, they are prepared to destroy the nuclear materials if they believe capture is imminent. How do they destroy it? Conventional explosives attached to each case. If detonated, the explosives would spread radioactive contamination over an area of several square kilometers, making this entire region uninhabitable for decades. Jake felt his heart sink. So we can't use overwhelming force to stop them. Correct. This has to be a precision operation that neutralizes the guards without giving them an opportunity to detonate the explosives. And it has to happen in terrain that offers minimal cover and multiple escape routes for the enemy. Sarah pointed to a narrow section of the pass where the road curved around a large rock formation. This is our best option. The convoy will have to slow down to navigate the curve, and the rock formation will provide cover for our approach. But we'll only have 1 chance to get it right. Jake examined the position more carefully. What's our extraction plan? We don't have one, Commander. Once we engage the convoy, every Taliban and ISIS fighter in a 50-kilometer radius will know our location. We'll have to exfiltrate on foot through some of the most hostile terrain in Afghanistan, carrying 600 pounds of radioactive materials, while being hunted by people who know these mountains better than we do. The silence that followed this statement was broken only by the wind whistling through the rocks above them. Jake realized that what Sarah was describing wasn't just a mission, it was a suicide mission with a slight possibility of survival for those skilled and lucky enough to survive the initial engagement. Martinez, I need to ask you something directly. Is this mission worth the lives of my team? Sarah looked at each member of Jake's team before answering. Commander, 3 months ago I intercepted a communication between Dr. Hassan and his contact in New York. They were discussing optimal weather conditions for dispersing radioactive materials over the largest possible area. The conclusion was that a device detonated in Queens during specific atmospheric conditions could contaminate parts of Manhattan, Brooklyn, and the Bronx. She paused, letting the implications sink in.
We're talking about 8 million people who would be forced to evacuate their homes, possibly permanently. We're talking about an economic impact that would dwarf 9/11. And we're talking about psychological warfare that would terrorize the entire American population.
Jake looked at his team and saw his own determination reflected in their faces.
How long do we have to get into position? 90 minutes, Commander. And there's one more thing you need to know. What's that? According to the intelligence I've gathered, this isn't the only nuclear smuggling operation currently active. This is a test run.
If this shipment reaches its destination successfully, there are at least 2 more planned for the next 6 months. Each one involving more nuclear materials and more sophisticated delivery methods.
Jake felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a physical burden.
Then, we better make sure this test run fails spectacularly. The approach to the convoy intercept position required 90 minutes of movement that tested every skill Jake Morrison's team had learned in their combined decades of special operations experience. Sarah Martinez led them through terrain that seemed designed by nature to kill careless humans, loose scree that could trigger landslides, narrow ledges with 1,000-foot drops, and wind patterns that could throw off the balance of even experienced mountaineers. What made the approach even more challenging was the need for absolute silence and invisibility. The mountain pass they were approaching was under constant observation by Taliban spotters positioned on surrounding peaks, and any sign of American military presence would trigger communications that would warn the nuclear smugglers to either change their route or destroy their cargo. Movement discipline is critical from this point forward, Sarah whispered as they crouched behind a boulder formation that provided their last concealed position before the final approach. The acoustics in this area carry sound for several kilometers. A dropped piece of equipment, a stumble on loose rocks, even heavy breathing at the wrong moment could compromise the entire operation. Jake studied the terrain ahead through his scope, identifying the positions where his team would need to be deployed to intercept the convoy without triggering the explosive devices attached to the nuclear materials. The tactical situation was unlike anything he had encountered in 23 years of military service, requiring simultaneous precision shooting from multiple positions while preventing enemy forces from activating deadman switches that would contaminate several square kilometers with radioactive material.
Martinez, walk me through the timing again. I need to understand exactly how this coordination is going to work.
Sarah pulled out a hand-drawn schematic that showed the convoy route, the positions of each team member, and the precise sequence of actions required for mission success. The level of detail in her planning demonstrated a familiarity with special operations tactics that impressed Jake despite his reservations about working with someone who had been operating outside official channels for 5 years. The convoy lead vehicle will round this curve at approximately 1,347 hours, based on their current rate of movement. The escort vehicle follows 50 meters behind, and the 2 trucks carrying nuclear materials maintain a 100-meter interval between them. She traced the convoy's path with her finger, indicating specific points where tactical actions would need to occur within seconds of each other. Chen and Williams will be positioned here, with overlapping fields of fire on the escort vehicle. Rodriguez and Kim take positions here and here, covering the lead truck.
Thompson covers the rear truck from this elevated position. What about you and me?
You provide command and control from this central position, with backup shooting capability for any target that isn't neutralized in the initial engagement. I take the overwatch position here, 800 meters back, with responsibility for eliminating any guards who survive the initial contact and attempt to detonate the explosive devices. Jake examined the shooting position Sarah had selected, noting that each offered optimal fields of fire while providing natural cover from return fire. The coordination required would challenge even the most experienced special operations teams, but the positioning was tactically sound.
Time from initiation of contact to complete neutralization of all threats? 15 seconds maximum, Commander.
Any longer than that and the probability of deadman switch activation approaches certainty. Jake felt the familiar pre-combat combination of adrenaline and focused calm that had kept him alive through dozens of high-risk operations.
What happens if we miss one of the guards? What happens if someone survives long enough to trigger the explosives? Sarah's expression was grimmer than Jake had seen it during their entire time together.
Then, we have approximately 30 seconds to get at least 5 kilometers away from the detonation site before radioactive contamination reaches lethal levels. And then, we spend the rest of our significantly shortened lives explaining to the families of Afghan civilians why their villages are now uninhabitable. The weight of potential consequences made Jake's stomach clench with anxiety that had nothing to do with personal safety and everything to do with the responsibility of preventing catastrophic civilian casualties.
Martinez, I need you to tell me honestly, what's the probability of mission success? Honestly?
If we were facing military-trained opponents with standard security protocols, I'd estimate a 30% chance of complete success. But we're facing smugglers who are overconfident because they believe their route is secure from American interdiction. That increases our chances to maybe 60%.
And the probability that at least some of us survive this operation? Sarah was quiet for several seconds before answering. Commander, if everything goes perfectly, we neutralize all threats, secure the nuclear materials, and begin exfiltration before enemy reinforcements arrive.
That's the best-case scenario, and it gives us maybe a 70% chance of reaching extraction alive.
What about worst-case scenario?
Worst case, we trigger a radiological incident that contaminates this entire region and creates an environmental disaster that lasts for decades.
Some of us die from acute radiation exposure.
The survivors spend their remaining lives in military hospitals while government officials decide whether our actions qualify as heroism or catastrophic negligence. Jake looked at his team members, each of whom was conducting final equipment checks with the professional focus that indicated they understood the stakes of the operation they were about to attempt. These men had volunteered for a career that required accepting risk of death in service to their country, but they had never been asked to accept risk of environmental catastrophe that could affect thousands of innocent civilians.
All right, people, final brief. This operation is unlike anything any of us has done before. We're not just trying to eliminate enemy combatants, we're trying to prevent a nuclear catastrophe.
That means perfect shot placement, perfect timing, and perfect coordination.
Questions? Hospital Corpsman Williams raised his hand. Sir, if we do get contaminated with radioactive material, what's our treatment protocol? Sarah answered before Jake could respond.
First priority is immediate decontamination using any available water source, followed by potassium iodide tablets if available. But, honestly, if you're exposed to the amount of radiation that would be released by detonating those explosive devices, medical treatment options are limited.
How limited?
You'd have maybe 48 hours before radiation sickness becomes irreversible. That's enough time to get you to a military hospital, but not enough time to guarantee survival. The silence that followed was broken by Petty Officer Rodriguez.
Ma'am, with respect, we're Navy SEALs. We've accepted worse odds for less important missions. If this operation prevents a nuclear attack on American soil, then these are acceptable risks.
Jake felt the same surge of pride in his team that had sustained him through every dangerous mission of his career. These men understood the moral calculus of special operations, that sometimes preventing catastrophic harm to others required accepting personal risks that most people would consider unthinkable.
All right, let's move to final positions. Radio silence from this point forward. Hand signals only unless we make contact with enemy forces. Chen, you've got point. Martinez, you take overwatch. Everyone else, stay in formation until we reach deployment positions.
The final approach took 25 minutes of careful movement through terrain that offered minimal cover and maximum exposure to observation from surrounding peaks. Jake's team moved with the fluid coordination that came from years of training together, but Sarah moved with a different kind of grace, the effortless efficiency of someone who had spent years learning every detail of this specific environment. When they reached the deployment area, Jake was surprised to discover that Sarah had prepared individual fighting positions for each team member during her previous reconnaissance of the area. Each position offered optimal fields of fire while providing natural protection from enemy observation and return fire.
How long did it take you to prepare these positions?
Jake whispered as he examined the carefully constructed rock walls and concealed shooting ports.
3 weeks. I've been planning this interdiction since I first identified the nuclear smuggling route.
I knew that when the opportunity came, there would be no time for field expedient fighting positions. Jake settled into his assigned position and checked his watch.
According to Sarah's intelligence, the convoy would reach their intercept point in 12 minutes.
Around him, his team was conducting final equipment checks and settling into the focused mental state that preceded high-stakes combat operations. Through his scope, Jake could see the road where the convoy would appear, winding between rock formations that provided natural cover for the defending forces while creating tactical disadvantages for anyone trying to transit the area quickly. Sarah had chosen the intercept point perfectly. The convoy would be forced to slow down to navigate the terrain, providing optimal conditions for precision shooting while minimizing opportunities for escape or evasive action.
Movement on the road, Chen's voice whispered through Jake's earpiece. Lead vehicle approaching from the west.
Jake raised his binoculars and confirmed Chen's observation. A Soviet-era truck was approaching the convoy route, moving slowly enough to suggest that its occupants were aware of the tactical challenges presented by the terrain. "That's our convoy," Sarah's voice confirmed through the radio. Lead vehicle carrying 4 guards, followed by escort vehicle with 2 additional guards, then 2 trucks with nuclear materials and 2 guards each. Jake counted the enemy forces in his head. 10 guards total, armed with automatic weapons and prepared to defend a shipment worth millions of dollars to terrorist organizations. The numerical odds weren't overwhelming, but the tactical complexity of preventing deadman switch activation while engaging multiple targets simultaneously made this one of the most challenging operations he had ever attempted.
Escort vehicle coming into view, Rodriguez reported.
Confirming 4 occupants in lead vehicle, 2 in escort. Jake watched through his scope as the convoy continued its approach to the intercept point. The vehicles were maintaining the intervals Sarah had predicted, and their rate of movement suggested confidence that the route was secure from American interdiction. That confidence would be their tactical disadvantage. Overconfident enemies often failed to maintain proper security protocols. "Nuclear material trucks are in sight," Thompson reported from his elevated position. "Confirming 2 guards in each truck, plus drivers."
"Roger that.
All stations, prepare for engagement.
Remember, we have one chance to get this right."
Perfect shot placement, perfect timing, perfect coordination.
"On my mark." Jake focused his attention on the lead vehicle as it approached the curve where the engagement would begin.
Through his scope, he could see the guards inside the vehicle, their weapons visible but not immediately ready for combat use.
The psychological advantage of surprise would last only seconds once the shooting started.
Lead vehicle entering kill zone in 10 seconds, Sarah reported from her overwatch position.
Escort vehicle following at optimal interval. Nuclear trucks maintaining formation.
Jake felt time slow down in the way it always did before high-stakes combat operations. Every detail of the scene became crystal clear: the position of enemy weapons, the placement of his team members, the precise moment when tactical conditions would be optimal for mission initiation.
5 seconds, Sarah reported. All targets in optimal engagement range.
Jake took a deep breath, exhaled half of it, and settled his scope's crosshairs on the lead vehicle's driver. Around him, he knew his team was making similar final preparations for shots that would determine whether this mission succeeded or created an environmental catastrophe that lasted for decades.
"Execute, execute, execute," Jake whispered into his radio. The next 15 seconds redefined Jake's understanding of coordinated special operations.
6 rifles fired within milliseconds of each other, each round precisely placed to neutralize specific threats without triggering the explosive devices attached to the nuclear materials. The sound of gunfire echoed through the mountain pass like thunder, followed by the distinctive crash of vehicles losing control and colliding with rock formations.
"Lead vehicle down, all targets neutralized," Chen reported. "Escort vehicle down, confirmed kills on both occupants," Rodriguez confirmed.
"Lead nuclear truck stopped, driver and guard eliminated," Kim added. "Rear nuclear truck stopped, both guards down," Thompson called out. Jake maintained his focus on the convoy wreckage, searching for any signs of surviving guards who might attempt to activate explosive devices. Through his scope, he could see bodies scattered around the vehicles, but combat experience had taught him that apparently dead enemies could sometimes surprise unwary operators.
"Overwatch, do you have eyes on all targets?" Jake radioed to Sarah. "Affirmative.
All 10 guards are down.
No movement detected around any vehicles.
But we need to move fast. I'm seeing dust clouds from the east that suggest reinforcements are already responding to the gunfire."
Jake felt relief and urgency in equal measure.
The engagement had succeeded without triggering the explosive devices, but their tactical situation was about to become exponentially more dangerous as Taliban fighters responded to the sound of gunfire in their operational area.
"All stations, bound to the convoy vehicles. Priority is securing the nuclear materials before enemy reinforcements arrive. Move, move, move."
Jake's team executed the transition from overwatch positions to convoy assault with the practiced efficiency that distinguished special operations forces from conventional military units. Each man moved quickly but carefully, maintaining situational awareness while advancing on vehicles that might still contain hidden threats or booby traps. When Jake reached the first nuclear materials truck, he found something that made his blood run cold. The 4 lead-line cases containing plutonium were secured in the truck bed with chains and locks, but attached to each case was a sophisticated explosive device that appeared to be connected to a central control unit.
Martinez, get down here. These explosives are more complex than you described. Sarah appeared at Jake's side within seconds, carrying equipment he recognized as military-grade bomb disposal tools. I know.
The intelligence I gathered suggested simple deadman switches, but these are remotely detonated devices with anti-tampering features.
Can you disarm them?
Sarah examined the devices carefully, tracing wire connections and identifying specific components that determined how the explosives would function.
Maybe.
But it's going to take at least 10 minutes per device, and we don't have 40 minutes before Taliban reinforcements overrun our position.
What are our options?
We take the nuclear materials with the explosives still attached and hope we can find a safe location to disarm them during exfiltration. Or we leave them here and hope that Taliban fighters don't accidentally detonate them while examining their prize. Jake felt the weight of command responsibility settling on his shoulders like a physical burden. Either option carried unacceptable risks. Moving nuclear materials with active explosives attached could trigger detonation during transport, but leaving them behind guaranteed they would eventually reach their intended destination.
How stable are these devices during movement? Unknown.
They appear to have motion sensors that might trigger detonation if the cases are moved too rapidly or tilted beyond certain angles.
Jake looked at the approaching dust clouds that indicated enemy reinforcements would arrive within minutes. All right, people, we're taking them with us.
Rodriguez and Kim, prepare to carry 2 cases each. Williams and Thompson, prepare to provide security during movement. Chen, prepare to lead us out of here. Sir, Chen said quietly, carrying 600 pounds of radioactive materials with active explosives attached through hostile territory isn't just dangerous, it's nearly impossible.
You're right, petty officer.
It's nearly impossible. But nearly impossible is what we do for a living. And leaving nuclear materials in the hands of Taliban fighters isn't an option. Sarah was already attaching carrying straps to the lead-line cases, moving with the careful precision required to avoid triggering motion-sensitive explosive devices. Commander, there's something else you need to know about these materials.
What now?
According to my source at the CIA, Dr. Hassan has been developing a new type of radiological weapon that requires only small amounts of plutonium but creates contamination that persists for much longer than conventional dirty bombs. If these materials reach their destination, the potential casualties aren't measured in thousands, they're measured in hundreds of thousands.
Jake felt his determination harden into something approaching obsession. Then, we make sure they don't reach their destination.
Team, prepare for the most difficult exfiltration of our careers. We're carrying nuclear materials through Taliban-controlled territory to reach an extraction point that's probably compromised, while being hunted by people who know this terrain better than we do.
Sir, what's our route?
Rodriguez asked while carefully lifting one of the lead-lined cases.
Martinez?
Sarah pointed toward a narrow mountain trail that disappeared into terrain that looked impassable for anyone carrying heavy equipment.
That trail leads to a valley where CIA assets can extract us by helicopter.
It's 15 kilometers of some of the most difficult terrain in Afghanistan, but it's our only option for avoiding Taliban reinforcements.
How long? If we move fast and don't run into organized opposition, maybe 6 hours.
If we encounter serious resistance or someone triggers the explosives accidentally, then time becomes irrelevant. Jake looked at his team, each man now carrying equipment that could kill him instantly if mishandled and radioactive materials that could slowly poison him even if handled perfectly. These men had volunteered for a career that required extraordinary courage, but they had never been asked to attempt something that challenged the boundaries of human capability.
All right, SEALs. Time to show the world why they send us to solve impossible problems. Martinez, take point. Chen, you've got rear security.
Everyone else, stay in formation and remember that we're not just carrying our own lives, we're carrying the lives of everyone who would be affected if these materials reach their target. As they began moving toward terrain that would test every skill they had learned in their military careers, Jake reflected on how dramatically his understanding of warfare had changed in the past 12 hours. This wasn't about politics or territory or ideology, it was about preventing mass casualties on a scale that would dwarf any terrorist attack in American history. And it all depended on 6 Navy SEALs and one woman who had spent 5 years learning to be invisible in some of the most dangerous mountains in the world. The 15-kilometer exfiltration through the Hindu Kush Mountains while carrying 600 pounds of radioactive materials with active explosives attached became a test of human endurance that redefined Jake Morrison's understanding of what Special Operations Forces could accomplish under impossible conditions. Each member of his team was carrying equipment that could kill him instantly if mishandled, through terrain that would challenge experienced mountaineers even without life-threatening cargo. Sarah Martinez moved ahead of the team with the fluid grace of someone who had spent 5 years learning every detail of this environment, but even her extraordinary mountain skills couldn't eliminate the fundamental challenges of their situation. The cases containing plutonium were designed to be heavy enough to provide radiation shielding, and the explosive devices attached to each case added both weight and the constant psychological pressure of knowing that any mistake could trigger instant death.
Movement to the south, Sarah whispered through the radio during their second hour of movement.
Approximately 30 Taliban fighters moving through the valley below us. They're following our trail, but they're at least 2 hours behind.
Jake adjusted his position behind a large boulder and raised his binoculars to confirm Sarah's observation.
Through the crystal-clear mountain air, he could see the dust clouds and occasional glimpses of armed figures that indicated a substantial enemy force was pursuing them with determination and professional competence.
How do they know which direction we went? Hospital Corpsman Williams asked quietly. We've been using hard ground and rock surfaces to avoid leaving tracks. They don't need tracks, Sarah replied.
They know this terrain better than we do, and they know there are only 3 possible routes out of that valley while carrying heavy equipment.
They're covering all 3 routes with separate search teams. Jake felt his stomach clench as he processed the tactical implications of what Sarah was describing. You're saying they anticipated that someone would attempt to exfiltrate with the nuclear materials?
I'm saying they had contingency plans for interdiction attempts, which suggests a level of operational sophistication that goes beyond typical Taliban capabilities. Someone with advanced training in special operations tactics helped them develop their security protocols. The possibility that they were facing enemy forces trained by someone with American military experience added another layer of complexity to an already overwhelming tactical situation. Jake had encountered foreign fighters with advanced training during previous deployments, but never while carrying materials that could contaminate several square kilometers if mishandled.
Rodriguez, how are you handling the case weight?
It's manageable, sir, but the motion sensors on these explosive devices are limiting how quickly we can move.
Any sudden movement or impact could trigger detonation. Jake understood Rodriguez's concern.
The lead line cases weighed approximately 150 pounds each, which was within the carrying capacity of physically fit special operations personnel under normal circumstances. But the attached explosive devices required careful handling that prevented the rapid movement typically used for evading pursuit in hostile territory.
Chen, time estimate to reach extraction point at our current rate of movement? At least 8 more hours, Commander.
Maybe 10 if we encounter serious terrain obstacles.
Jake felt his heart sink.
8 to 10 hours of movement through territory controlled by Taliban fighters who were actively hunting them, while carrying nuclear materials that could accidentally detonate if mishandled. The probability of mission success was decreasing with each passing hour. Martinez, you mentioned that the CIA has extraction assets in this area.
What kind of assets, and where exactly?
Sarah pulled out a waterproof map case and spread out a detailed topographic chart that showed their current position and the intended extraction point. CIA has a helicopter landing zone in this valley, approximately 12 kilometers northeast of our current position. The problem is that Taliban forces are aware of the LZ and have positioned anti-aircraft weapons to prevent American extraction operations.
What kind of anti-aircraft weapons? Soviet-era surface-to-air missiles and at least 2 Zu-23 anti-aircraft guns. Enough firepower to guarantee that any helicopter attempting extraction would be shot down before landing.
Jake studied the map, looking for alternative routes or positions that might offer tactical advantages for neutralizing anti-aircraft defenses. What he saw instead was terrain that heavily favored defenders and offered minimal cover for approaching forces.
Are there alternative extraction points?
2 possibilities, but both require additional movement through terrain that's even more difficult than what we're currently facing.
And both are probably under Taliban surveillance by now.
Jake felt the familiar weight of command responsibility, complicated by the knowledge that any decision he made could result in environmental catastrophe affecting thousands of innocent civilians.
Martinez, I need you to give me an honest assessment of our chances of reaching any extraction point alive. Sarah was quiet for nearly a minute before answering.
Commander, if we were just trying to evade pursuit and reach friendly forces, I'd estimate our chances at about 70%. We're well trained, we know basic evasion techniques, and we have enough firepower to handle small Taliban units. But we're carrying nuclear materials that limit our movement speed and tactical options. We're being pursued by people who know this terrain better than we do. And we're facing enemy forces that appear to have anticipated American interdiction attempts.
Bottom line?
Bottom line, our chances of completing this mission successfully are probably less than 30%. Our chances of preventing the nuclear materials from reaching their intended destination are somewhat better, but only if we're willing to accept options that guarantee we don't survive. Jake looked at his team members, each of whom was listening to the conversation while maintaining security watch on their immediate surroundings. These men had volunteered for careers that required accepting risk of death in service to their country, but they deserved to understand exactly what they were being asked to sacrifice.
All right, people, gather around for a team conference.
We need to discuss our tactical options, and everyone needs to understand what we're facing. When his team had assembled in a small circle behind concealing rocks, Jake spread out Sarah's map and pointed to their current position and the various extraction options.
Here's our situation.
We're carrying nuclear materials that terrorists plan to use in an attack on American soil. We're being pursued by Taliban forces that outnumber us at least 5 to 1 and know this terrain better than we do. And our extraction options are either heavily defended or require movement through terrain that we probably can't traverse while carrying this equipment. He paused, looking each man in the eye before continuing. Martinez has given me an honest assessment that our chances of successfully completing this mission are less than 30%. That means there's a 70% probability that some or all of us are going to die in these mountains.
The silence that followed was broken by Petty Officer Thompson.
Sir,
what happens if we don't complete the mission? What happens if these nuclear materials reach their destination? Sarah answered before Jake could respond.
According to CIA intelligence, the materials we're carrying will be assembled into radiological dispersal devices designed to contaminate large areas of New York City. Conservative estimates suggest 8 million people would be forced to evacuate their homes, with economic damages in the hundreds of billions of dollars.
What about casualties? Immediate casualties from radiation exposure would probably be in the thousands. Long-term casualties from cancer and other radiation-related illnesses could reach hundreds of thousands over several decades. Hospital Corpsman Williams spoke next. Ma'am, you mentioned that this isn't the only nuclear smuggling operation currently active. What happens if we succeed in stopping this shipment but other operations continue? This operation is a test run.
If these materials reach their destination successfully, the same network plans to smuggle larger quantities of nuclear materials using the same routes and methods. Stopping this shipment prevents not just this attack, but potentially dozens of future attacks.
Jake felt the weight of responsibility settle on his shoulders like a physical burden.
The tactical situation was nearly hopeless, but the consequences of failure were unthinkable.
All right, team, here are our options as I see them.
Option 1, we continue toward the primary extraction point, knowing that we'll probably be detected and engaged by superior enemy forces before reaching safety. Option 2, we attempt to reach one of the alternative extraction points, which requires movement through terrain that might be impassable while carrying this equipment. Option 3, we destroy the nuclear materials here and accept that the radiation will contaminate this immediate area for decades.
Option 4, Sarah added quietly, we split up.
Part of the team continues with the nuclear materials toward extraction while the rest provides a diversion that draws Taliban forces away from the primary route. Jake felt his heart clench. That's not an option, Martinez.
We don't abandon teammates in hostile territory.
Commander, with respect, if 3 of us draw enemy attention to the south while the rest of you continue northeast with the nuclear materials, the probability of mission success increases to maybe 60%.
And the probability of survival for the diversion team?
Near zero. But the probability of preventing nuclear terrorism increases dramatically. Jake looked around the circle at his team members, each of whom was considering the tactical and moral implications of what Sarah was proposing. The mathematics of the situation were brutally clear. Sacrificing 3 lives to save hundreds of thousands was strategically sound. But, accepting that 3 of his teammates would die to complete the mission violated everything he had learned about special operations leadership.
There has to be another option.
Sarah pulled out her satellite phone and dialed a number from memory. After several seconds of routing through encrypted relays, she handed the phone to Jake.
Director Collins, this is Commander Morrison. Commander, what's your current status?
We successfully interdicted the nuclear smuggling convoy, but we're carrying the materials through hostile territory while being pursued by substantial Taliban forces.
Our extraction options are limited and our chances of mission success are declining rapidly.
The pause on the other end of the line lasted nearly 15 seconds.
Commander, I'm going to authorize an option that violates every protocol we've established for this type of operation.
What kind of option?
We're going to bring you home with overwhelming force.
Air support, extraction helicopters, and whatever ground support we can muster. The political consequences will be significant, but preventing nuclear terrorism on American soil justifies extraordinary measures.
Jake felt a surge of hope that was immediately dampened by tactical reality. Director Collins, the enemy has positioned anti-aircraft weapons at our primary extraction point. Any helicopter attempting extraction will be shot down. Then, we eliminate the anti-aircraft weapons first.
How much time do you need to reach the extraction point?
Approximately 6 hours at our current rate of movement.
You'll have air support over your position in 4 hours. 10 Warthogs with orders to eliminate any ground-based air defense systems in your operational area. Extraction helicopters will be on station 30 minutes after the air defense threat is neutralized. Jake looked at his team and saw the same mixture of hope and skepticism that he was feeling. Air support would dramatically improve their chances of survival, but 4 hours was a long time to evade pursuit while carrying nuclear materials through hostile territory.
Director Collins, what if we don't make it to the extraction point?
Commander, if you're compromised before air support arrives, your orders are to destroy the nuclear materials in place. Localized radiation contamination is preferable to allowing those materials to reach American soil.
Understood.
We'll be ready for extraction in 4 hours. Jake handed the phone back to Sarah and looked at his team. All right, SEALs, change of plans. We've got incoming air support that will clear our extraction route, but we need to stay alive and mobile for the next 4 hours.
Questions?
Sir, what if Taliban forces locate us before the air support arrives?
Rodriguez asked.
Then, we fight. And if fighting isn't enough, we make sure these nuclear materials never leave Afghanistan. Jake stood up and shouldered his equipment, feeling the familiar pre-combat combination of fear and determination that had sustained him through 23 years of dangerous missions.
Martinez, take point. Chen, rear security. Everyone else, stay in formation and remember that we're 4 hours away from going home.
As they resumed movement through terrain that challenged the limits of human endurance, Jake reflected on how dramatically his understanding of heroism had evolved during the past 12 hours. Heroes weren't people who performed impossible feats without fear, they were people who performed necessary actions despite overwhelming fear and insurmountable odds. And, sometimes, being a hero meant accepting that you might not survive to be recognized for what you had accomplished. The next 4 hours tested every physical and mental capability Jake's team had developed during their military careers. They moved through terrain that would have challenged experienced mountaineers even without carrying radioactive materials, while evading pursuit by enemy forces that seemed to anticipate their every tactical decision. But they had also discovered something important about themselves and about each other. When faced with a mission that required risking everything to prevent mass casualties on American soil, they had chosen duty over safety, mission accomplishment over personal survival. When the sound of a 10 Warthog screaming overhead finally echoed through the mountain valley, Jake felt a surge of pride that had nothing to do with personal accomplishment and everything to do with the knowledge that his team had prevented nuclear terrorism through sheer determination and professional competence. Sarah Martinez stood beside him as they watched the extraction helicopters approach, her 5 years of solitary warfare finally coming to an end.
Commander, there's something I need to tell you about my mission.
What's that? This was never just about stopping nuclear terrorism. This was about proving that sometimes individual actions can make a difference when official channels fail. You and your team accomplished something today that will prevent thousands of deaths, and nobody will ever know what you did. Jake watched the helicopters settle into the landing zone that had been cleared by precision airstrikes, feeling the relief that came with mission completion and the satisfaction that came with duty fulfilled. Martinez, in my experience, the most important missions are the ones nobody ever knows about. As they boarded the extraction helicopter with the nuclear materials safely secured, Jake realized that this mission had taught him something fundamental about the nature of service and sacrifice.
Sometimes protecting innocent lives required accepting risks that most people would consider unthinkable.
Sometimes preventing catastrophe required individuals willing to risk everything for people they would never meet. And, sometimes, being a hero meant understanding that the most important victories were the ones that prevented tragedies from happening in the first place. The woman who had been known as Calamard, the death ant, sat quietly in the helicopter as it carried them away from mountains where she had spent 5 years waging a solitary war against terrorism. But Sarah Martinez was no longer fighting alone. She had found teammates who understood that some missions were more important than survival, and some victories were worth any sacrifice required to achieve them.